Good evening. How's everyone doing? I am Dr. Gregory Salters, and we are here discussing issues pertinent to law enforcement. Many times in our lives, we deal with things that we're unfamiliar with. Sometimes when we're looking at issues that are in our community, we're wondering what's going on with our partnerships with law enforcement. We're wondering what can we do to partner with law enforcement. Why are we having issues in our community with the strained relations with law enforcement? What's happening out here? What's going on with the procedures? We often talk about procedural justice, and we've talked about it. We've laid out certain tenets. And one of the talks I had, we just talked about overly how is it when we're talking about procedural justice, and how does it deal with our community? How do we deal with each other? What is really out there? What we're going to be doing tonight is I figured we could talk about procedural justice, but what I want to do is make it really real to us and see how using procedural justice can assist us, or some situations where we as in law enforcement could do a little bit better with the actions that we've taken. What I'm doing is I'm going to take the fact pattern of a case that has happened, and we're going to lay it over our procedural justice lens to see how we're actually going to look at this issue. Because I think this particular issue will definitely show us how procedural justice helps us. Because if you look at what procedural justice is really all about, when you look at the curriculum, when you look at the things that are there, ultimately procedural justice is here for officer safety. And a lot of times that safety can be dealing whether it is politically inside the organization and or physically when we're out in the community. Because a lot of times when we talk about safety, we think physical. But I'm an ethics instructor. That's not one of our high liability areas. But when I teach ethics, I tend to tell people if you do something that is unethical or you violate someone's civil rights, not only will your agency be liable, but you will also be held liable individually. So what we want to do is make sure that we equip our officers and our team with everything that we can do to be safe. And when you look at the tenets of procedural justice and we lay those out for you, I believe that you will see how using procedural justice will actually help us. We're talking about it again. When you look at it, I have spoken with some individuals and I've had the opportunity to teach inside my agency, procedural justice, and we've been able to open the eyes of individuals and see how this actually can impact us, see how it can help us. And most of all, with the officers that are out there, when we're out there doing our jobs, don't we really want to know that our policies and procedures are in place to protect us? I know many officers are out and we're talking about how society is really anti-police, and we get that feeling. But there's still a lot of people out there that really appreciate the work we do. They understand the work we do and want us to come home safely and want us out there doing our jobs. So when we're looking at procedural justice, let's see the benefits of it that we can do that really brings us together to where we can actually work together as a community, be together. Everybody laid out things. It's like, wow, how does this happen? So let's think about it. With procedural justice, one of the tenets that we use is we're talking about fairness. Is the process fair? We're talking about voice. We're talking about impartiality and transparency. How many times have we wondered what has happened and things just were not as transparent as we've wanted them to be? So when we look at it, is that a big issue sometimes? And we look at it in law enforcement, and even as an adult, how many times have we done things and, you know, you're growing up and your parents tell you not to do something and you say, why? And they say, just because I told you to, or just because I'm your parent. Many times in law enforcement, we've gotten to that situation where we tend to say that or act that way to where we really don't give the public a voice in what things are happening. So when we're talking about the voice, we're talking about the transparency, we're talking about laying things out that our community actually needs. So when we do that, we begin to build bridges, we begin to build allies, we begin to be able to address the crime in our area, and we also begin to increase the safety of our officers. Because I believe if you look at all of the incidents that have happened in our communities where it has been unrest, many times that unrest is due to a lack of trust. And one of the things that we can do when we're using procedural justice, it's kind of like I tell people, one of the phrases that you'll hear a lot is people must know you, like you, and trust you. Once you have that trust, then you have an ability to connect with and engage with individuals, and you are now in a leadership position. So we talk about it. That's the transparency. We need to be transparent where individuals know what's going on. The issue that we have sometimes is we just are not as transparent as we could be in our communities. And sometimes it could be that we have absolutely nothing to hide, but we just don't share enough of the right information. So now that tends to hurt us. We've mentioned the voice in the community. That tends to hurt us by not giving individuals the voice to actually listen to what they are. Impartiality. How many times have you think things have happened and it just was not impartial, or you think that people were partial to someone else? Even growing up playing sports, we would say the referee stole the game. My coach would say you should play this game so well that it would be impossible for the referee to take the game from you. That's dealing with process. Same thing when we're out there and we're law enforcement officers. How many times, or everybody else, how many times have you been stopped by law enforcement? You did not get a citation, but your encounter was so negative, you wish that they would have given you the citation. The process was an issue. So now when we look at those particular things, we're going to try to delve into a particular case. I'm going to lay out a fact pattern. And I want us to think about the things that we have that are laid out and see if, in fact, they are going to stand up to the test of procedural justice. And I'm also going to come back at different points and we're going to talk about where we could have gone wrong. And this is a fact pattern of an actual case that's gone out. And some individuals may be familiar with the case. And this case that I'm using is an interesting one because it has a lot of blend of a lot of different things that happen as individuals, as professionals, and happen in everyday life. And we think that sometimes as we do things, it really will not have a bigger impact as it should. And from an ethical standpoint, we have to look at things and watch that slippery slope, because as we're having ethics study, particularly when we're dealing with applied ethics, we deal with things stating the slippery slope, which means you might first start off, you didn't tell a lie, you might just have an error of omission. So you begin to omit things. So nobody can say you lied about it, but you just didn't say it. You know, and then it's like, well, you didn't ask me that. So then things begin going down that slope. And over time, they normally say it's between the years 5 and 10. That's when you've learned enough and you really start trying to skirt around certain issues. And that's when you begin to lie or falsify. And here in the state of Florida, you'll find out through our Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they will let you know that the charge that is sustained the most is untruthfulness. And a lot of times the reason that that is untruthfulness is as a secondary charge. So it occurs during the investigation at some point in there. Someone makes a statement that isn't actually true. And what we're doing is, as a law enforcement officer, there are many of us in this profession that are truly working hard, that are out there doing our job. And I can tell you now that there are times we try to make it strictly white or black. It's not a white or black issue necessarily. I have plenty of individuals that are not black or brown that are working in this profession, care about the community, and doing everything professionally. And this is really an interesting time in our society, because now when they're out and I've talked to them, they're like, wow, why is everybody painting us with a broad brush as if we're all bad cops? We had nothing to do with the incidents that happened in another part of the city, another part of the country, another part of the world, but we're getting this broad brush. And we've been able to use this common strife as an outstanding time to talk, because now as a black male in law enforcement, I'm able to say, now you feel our pain and what we're dealing with. So now what we can both do is begin to treat everybody based on the totality of the circumstances. Nadia Assad, glad to see you're joining us this evening. I know you're working with your campaign out there in Lauderhill, Florida. Wayne Boyer, glad that you're with us because you have an integral role over there at the Broward County Institute of Public Safety and training our officers and individuals and make sure that you're setting that model for what we do from a procedurally just standpoint and as we treat everybody with respect, because I think that's what we really need to be doing. So without further ado, let me go into and lay out some fact patterns for us. First thing that I want to do as a fact pattern is, how many of you all have ever called someone, a fellow officer, and this type thing, and you called them and it went to voicemail? In this particular case, an officer, a black officer, called a white officer called another officer, a black officer, and wanted him to handle a case for him because the white officer was busy. But when he called the officer, the voicemail went to the call went to his voicemail. So now when that occurred, the white male, I'm assuming, did not realize the voicemail picked up, and he used a negative racial slur for that individual. So now imagine when you get back to your phone, if you're this officer and you pick up your voicemail from your fellow police officer and you're thinking, hey, okay, I wonder what they're wanting in this. This could be the last thing you were ever expecting to hear. And you're like, wow, now I see what's going on. Based on policy and procedure, you begin to follow the procedures. You report the incident gets reported. Everything is going fine along the chain. All the procedural justice pillars are falling into place. But then what happens is there is nothing that really happens. You don't think about it. And then you find out that nothing happened. But now within the organization, there's something that happens in the organization that causes them to look back at the particular case. And we're talking about there has been some time frame that has passed, over a year or so. Now, when you begin peeling back the onions, let's suppose all these times has passed, this was something that did occur where someone should have been issued discipline. Now you go back and we go back to procedures. If discipline was supposed to have been issued, why wasn't it? You begin asking the questions. So now if you are transparent, and sometimes in our organizations, if we're really transparent, we just say, this was an administrative error and this is what we did. You can make those administrative errors because it will fall within the procedural justice pillars of transparency. But now you look at it and you say, okay, did they do that? If not, why? This particular case, that wasn't exactly what occurred. There was not truly a sense of transparency. But since now it had gone beyond the stated time that it could, the discipline that could have been issued was not issued. So now when it was not issued, then everyone is like, wow, if you're from a community that you think that you do not have voice, and many times we wonder why the community does not speak with us and why they do not let us know what's going on, because some communities are very frustrated and stated, when we've told you this about a certain officer, or we've told you this about a certain situation, and you seemingly never care, you seemingly never address the issue, why would we continue doing that? So in this particular case, there was nothing that occurred. And then when you look at it, you say, well, gee, there are different individuals that are in play here. And most times when you're looking at certain cases, they must go up through various levels of management. So as you go up the levels of management, at each level that we have, all of us are responsible for at least doing our part in being procedurally just. So in this particular case, it went up to a high level manager. That manager made a decision saying, okay, based on everything that is out there and the procedures, when we have not given people their discipline within a certain period of time, we basically can't go back and cite them or give them that discipline. So therefore, now our hands are tied procedurally. And so therefore, the individual does not receive discipline. And therefore, when you're up for promotions, you're up for lateral transfers, they look in your file to see if, in fact, you have any negative marks. So in this particular case, that would be one mark that would have been negative that is not in the file. So now, of course, as management, we would definitely step forward and say that this was an error. This is some things that we should have done. But now let's look at both sides of this coin. You have one individual who does not have a negative mark that should have had a negative mark. And you have another officer who is here in your agency that has made the complaint that said, wow, this was wrong. I was wronged, and management didn't do anything. Sounds simple from that standpoint. But let's go out a little bit, that both officers are now in your agency and in the community. One officer goes out feeling less than respected, feels as though the procedures were not in place. There was no fairness. It appeared to be not impartial. So it appeared to be that it was partial to that individual. So one career begins to not be hampered or soars, and the other individual is like, wow, this is how it goes. And then both narratives go out in that person's circle. So now another one, it becomes to be commonplace as, oh, this is what we did. Nothing's going to happen. So now if they're doing it inside the agency to those that are their coworkers, when we talk about internal procedural justice, then we're like, wow, if that is the way that we treat our coworkers, how do we treat the public? And it really doesn't matter what you say or write. It's more, how is your heart? How do you do your work? And these type things. So now when you look at it, you have two separate things. And the public looks at it and is like, wow, procedural justice, the process is what the problem is. They aren't focusing so much on the outcome, but the process. Were both individuals subjected to a fair process? And then you think about it as the public. Let's look at it. Let's suppose, how many of us have ever made a complaint with an organization, made a complaint? It could be even in retail, or even if you go to a restaurant and you think about it. If you go to a restaurant and your waiter does not serve you properly and you make a complaint, you're going to have that resolved by either reducing or eliminating their tip. And sometimes I've had it to where restaurants have changed the waiter. Unfortunately, in law enforcement, we do not have that ability to do that. And one of the things that we look at as law enforcement officers, and I will tell you, just as my other outstanding law enforcement officers will tell you, the thing that good cops hate the most are bad cops. That is what we hate, because all it takes is one bad apple and it begins to make it seem like all of us are doing what's happening there. Then we begin to see, are certain people rewarded for what they do or aren't they? So when we lay over the procedural justice, just in those little bitty fact patterns, when you think about it, what is the process that must be followed as a police officer when, let's say inside the organization, when there's something that happens that does not seem just to you, so that we're seeing if internally we are just, what processes or procedures are in place for us to make those known? And with us being a paramilitary organization, we would follow the chain of command and making individuals aware of the issue. And now once you make people aware of the issue, it is up to them to determine what happens at that particular point. And it's very interesting because based on what happens, it kind of molds your organization, or the culture of the organization. And from the organization, it begins to be the culture of the profession. And when you begin to look at things, I will tell you that for most individuals, a person's perception is a person's reality. So many times you have to look at your actions and how will the public perceive your actions? Because if the public will perceive your actions as unjust, they may look at it and say, wow, this was not fair. So now let's go back to our scenario. So the white officer calls the black officer, leaves a message there. So now that it comes to the forefront, whether it is that day, many days later, we're looking at the procedure that comes into place. So now what would be interesting is to go back and see, were there any promotions that were made? Were there any lateral transfers that were made in either of the officers' career path? Or was one individual continue going? And even from an administrative standpoint, what happened to the administrator that did not make the timely notification? Were these things that we corrected moving forward? Or does it appear as though they were rewarded for what they did with a promotion and or other lateral transfers? And a lot of times when we do these things from an administrative standpoint, we are wondering, how do we move it forward? And with our officers are like, wow, if I'm doing something, will management have my back? And this is one of the things that I've definitely been talking with about officers, and officers having the concerns about what's going on in the community and making sure that management has their back when they're following policies and procedures. And one thing I would tell all of my law enforcement executives, we cannot ask officers to do things that we're not doing in terms of procedurally just things and making sure that we're following our own policies and guidelines. We must set those standards and be able to support our officers when they're out there doing their jobs. And we also have to work with the public, because we have to let the public know what the processes are. So many times I've seen individuals calling for certain things to happen to officers in the state of Florida because they've seen something on the news that's happened in another state with law enforcement. We must understand that each state, each jurisdiction has different laws, different policies, and different procedures that must be followed. So if you're not working in law enforcement, make sure that you engage with your law enforcement community. Make sure you engage with your police department, engage with your city council individuals, engage with the legislatures and your administrators, because we would love for everyone to be informed of what the procedures are. Because that's one thing that I've really talked with the officers about and really talked with the public about, is many times people are unaware of the procedures which must be followed. And what that does is it creates more of a tension between the public and the police department, because if you're calling for something that we really cannot do, and as passionate as you are about it, there's certain things that we just cannot change, and it would jeopardize everything. So find out what the policies are, find out what your procedures are, because that's one thing that the officers are definitely do. We do have due process, which means we have to follow the processes that are out there to deal with the issues that come up. Many times people are just saying, forget the process. And a lot of times we have to understand that the end doesn't justify the means. Say, yes, we did this, doesn't matter what we did. Once again, that's dealing with your process and dealing with your procedures. So now when you talk about it, when we look at every situation, you need to look at it and say, were we transparent in what happened in the situation? That issue of transparency is what gets many people when we're talking about procedural justice. If you look at many of the situations that are happening now, most times individuals are asking for transparency. Can I see this? What happened here? Just tell us what happened. Now, within your processes, if you have a process as to why you cannot be as transparent as others would like for you to be transparent about that. Let them know we cannot tell you this particular information because our investigation is ongoing, and we believe that this will cause a problem in our investigation. Communicate with them. Then when you're having voice, listen to what people are talking about. Let them have some say in what's going on. Even if it's dealing with your recruitment and retention of officers, how do they play into that? Do you listen to the public in that? That's what most people are wanting to happen. When you're dealing with this particular case with the officer inside your agency, you're wanting to listen to them. Did you really listen to the officer's concerns? Did you really give them voice? And after this process, how did you leave them feeling? Because many times we could have individuals in our organization that we have made feel less than. And when you make a person feel less than, you're not going to get your best work out of them. They're not going to be doing that, and they will always be feeling as though you feel less of them. So that's going to hurt you in your procedurally just standpoint. The other one is impartial. The actions that you took, anytime that you take an action, and I use this litmus test when I'm talking to individuals, when you're taking that action, are you willing to do the same thing the next time when all of the fact patterns are the same? If your answer is no, then you should not do it in this particular case. So you must be sure, because that's what people do as a professional and as individuals. People look at us and say, we often hear this phrase, fair, firm, and consistent. Some people get the fairness and the firmness right, but they aren't consistent. But what people do as an individual, they look at you to see, how are you? Are you consistent? So they begin to look at us as a profession. They begin to look and say, how many incidents do we have that are procedurally just? Or every time that we have an issue, is it some issue of procedural justice that is going by the wayside? It's just like right now, when you're looking at the transparency, that is one of the reasons why individuals wanted us to have the body worn cameras and the videos, because that gives you a video and gives you some sense of transparency of what was going on out there. That's what we're dealing with. Then the other issue of fairness. Were your actions really fair when you took those? Fair meaning, was it the same for everybody? Because sometimes you can have issues where within our organizations, two different people do the same exact thing and the fact pattern is the same. But if we aren't procedurally just, one will be disciplined one way and one will be disciplined the next. What does that do? Inside your organization, it creates turmoil. It creates it to where you think that you have a team that's working together to solve crime. But a team is a group of individuals trusting each other. But if individuals do not trust each other, then you really don't have a team. So we have to work together and show the officers, when we're in management, we show the officers, these are our policies and procedures. This is how we do it. We're going to definitely be behind you. We know that we do have a due process whenever anything's happen, and we must be consistent with that. But we also have to work with the public and say, okay, what is it that is going on, good, bad, or indifferent? This is how we handle things inside the police department. These are the policies and procedures. It's guided many times by state law. So therefore, this is how we do it. So therefore, if all sides understand the procedures and the processes, we can definitely move forward. The other thing that you look at is that when we do these particular things, the thing that is most, I think, harmful to our community and our organizations is that when we take actions, many times people will not come to us right away and tell us that what we did does not appear to be transparent, does not appear to be fair. Their actions will show us. So therefore, it might be something that Officer Salters does out in the community, and the community does not believe it's fair. But then Officer Boyer will go there after me, and he gets the brunt or the backlash on whatever it is that I did. So I made life rough on him, and it had nothing to do with him. That's Elizabeth Edwards. She says law enforcement and the community should be another form of a team. But yes, the team must be solid from within and first. And also, Elizabeth, when you say that, when you talk about, just like I just defined team, law enforcement and the community should be another form of a team. And we do work together and we must collaborate and we must engage each other. But the important factor there is trust. If there is no trust between the law enforcement and the community, if there is no trust, neither one of us can go further. We're not really a team at that point. We are just a group of individuals. So on both sides, this is a two-sided coin. We both must work together to get together, to learn each other, to trust each other so that we can all move forward. Because I think a lot of times in the discussions I've seen, people ask about law enforcement, but all of the law enforcement officers live in a community. It's not like we are from some other place and we go back to this place when we're not working, and then we just come from this place and are landed in a community to do this. Law enforcement officers, contrary to popular belief, are people too. We do make mistakes, but we are definitely out here trying to come up. You hear the reforming, you hear the reallocation of funds. We're all out here trying to make sure our communities are safe. We're trying to treat everyone with respect. And if we take that as what we're trying to do, then we can see the value in something such as a procedural justice. Imagine right now, if you just don't do anything else, but when you have a conversation, even in your household, when there is something that goes different, we'd be like, wait a minute, did we listen to the individuals? Did we give them voice? Or were we just listening to respond? Are you listening to understand? The other thing that we look at is the transparency. Are we tremendously transparent with what we're doing and why we're doing it? We need to do that. The other thing, are we impartial? Are we doing the same thing for everybody? Whatever I do for one, I will do for other. That's basic algebra. Whatever you do on one side of the equation, you must do on the other. When you don't do that, things do not line up. That's that thing of mathematics, man. And then the other one is fairness. When you have been fair and people believe that you're fair, you will have people say, man, how many times have we had a teacher that teacher was very, very hard on us, but they were hard on everybody. So that was fair. They were very difficult on everybody. It's kind of like working at the police department. I know some individuals that are motormen, and they would write any and everybody in their family a citation. So when you get a citation from them, do not complain, because that's what they do fairly. And I've worked with some detectives, and they are very, very thorough on every case that they do. It takes them a while. They go through, they ask the things, they find out, they connect with individuals, but they are that thorough with everyone. So when we're looking for that consistency within our organization, we need to think about it. When we're not procedurally just, what does that do for our image? If there's certain things that happen and they say police department X or our profession is not just, that causes problems for all of us in our profession. So we must strive with everything that we do to be transparent. We must strive to always give individuals voice, listen to what they're saying, so that therefore we can respond intelligently. Also, be impartial. Whatever it is you do for one, be sure that you would do it for someone else. And also be fair. When we have those procedural justice tenets in place, we can definitely go far. Let me see if we have any other questions that have come up. You just feel free to type those in. If I don't get to them now, I'll definitely answer them in the course of the evening. I'll get back to everyone. Please feel free to visit. It's also over on YouTube. Be sure to like the pages that we're on. If you have questions or anything that you would like to have discussed, let me know. We can definitely discuss those. We're looking at possibly putting on some classes over here where we can be really applying what it is that we're dealing with, because I've had some very good conversations with individuals. I've had some with some law enforcement agencies where we're like, wow, the procedural justice is beginning to make more and more sense. It helps as a guiding principle when you're over there and you just simply lay it out saying, are our actions procedurally just? Is our organization procedurally just? When we're dealing with the community, are we procedurally just? Because as they stated in the training, a lot of times it is not the outcome that matters. It is the process. So are we following the processes that are in place to really move us forward? And when we do that, that helps us. But when you look at a lot of the strain, people are complaining about the process. So as I stated before, my name is Dr. Gregory Salters. Tonight we were discussing procedural justice and using it as a case study. I challenge you to use these tenets, use the pillars of procedural justice, transparency, voice, impartiality, and fairness. Use those pillars when you're analyzing any of the issues that you're involved with, and let me know how that worked for you. See if you can check all 4 pillars. If you cannot check out all 4 pillars, then there's a problem. How you doing, Dr. Shanique? Now, Dr. Shanique, if y'all are looking for some really improvement stuff and taking things to the next level with some of your leadership stuff, she comes from that hospital background, hospital medical administration stuff on the high level. Dealing with your C-suite, you definitely need to touch base with Dr. Shanique. So thank you for tuning in, Doc. And so a lot of things we're looking at is let's make sure our processes are in place and we can follow them. That causes us to review our policies. Have you reviewed your policies? Are your policies up to date? Do they make sense now? Are there things that we can improve on to help with our organization and also help us engage more with the public? So once again, I'm Dr. Gregory Salters, and you all have been seasoned for success. Have a good evening.